Welcome back to the LinkedIn clone. In this video, we'll be implementing the authentication functionality in our Ionic Angular front-end project. So just a demonstration of what we're going to achieve today. If we go to our LinkedIn clone and we try and go to our feed or home, it reroutes us back to the authentication module. So we have the guarded route, and the implementation for registering has also been implemented. So if I make a new account, let's say John Doe, and it's going to be jdoe@hotmail.com, and we'll just type a password here. If we say accept and join, we'll get navigated to, it will toggle to the login component, and we'll have our email and password there. And if we go and sign in, we can see that in our application in local storage here, we are getting our JSON web token, and we now have access to this page. So one thing to note is this user here is a regular user, and for the role-based access control or authorization side of things, I've simply used their role to change the color of this header background here. So to demonstrate that, if I sign out and I sign in as John2, we see that we get this nice gold here. This is the admin user. And if I sign out and I sign in to john3@hotmail.com, we get this nice purple background here. So they're the admin and premium users. And one thing to note is, since we have this token in our local storage, if we were to refresh the page, we're getting that token and we still have access to that. Now there's some additional things going on with regards to Ionic and Capacitor, in the sense that if you're on your mobile phone, there's also a way to tap into your local mobile's phone storage and get the token that way as well. So let's get started. So we can go ahead and we can open up our project, and if you haven't been following along, I'd encourage you to watch the previous videos, or you can just clone the repo from the GitHub repository in the description below. But I'm going to start off by running the server. So if I just cd into the API folder and I run an npm run start dev, that should get our API going, and that will have our connection to our Postgres database. And if I open up another terminal, I can cd into the front end project, LinkedIn. And before I run an Ionic serve, I just want to generate a few things ahead of time. So recall the LinkedIn folder structure. If you go to the source, into the app, we have an auth module and a home module. Now we're going to implement the authentication side of things in this video, so I want to build up on this folder structure here. So I'm going to use the Ionic CLI, and I'm going to generate a service within the auth folder, and I'm going to nest it in a services folder, and I'm going to call it auth. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to skip making the spec file. So we've got that. So the next thing I'm going to generate with the Ionic CLI is I'm going to generate a guard, and I'm going to put this in auth/guards/auth, and once again I'm going to run the test command. Now you have a choice here of choosing between can activate child, can deactivate, and can load. I've actually already gone over how to do can activate in my login playlist in Node and Angular. So if you wanted to use can activate, you can check out that video. But in this video, I'm going to use can load. And what's the difference? Well, the main difference is can activate, it's used to prevent unauthorized users from accessing routes. But where it differs to can load is can load, it also prevents the module from being loaded lazily if you're not authorized. So in the can activate case, if you try and run the route that has the guard on it, it can still load the source code for the module. So I'm going to go ahead and use the more secure can load in this one. And obviously everything's protected because you need to have a valid token and make the request to the back end. So even if they were to look at your front end code, it's not really a problem, and it might be slightly more optimal to have it lazily loaded. But if you were to have things like an admin module and you didn't want, other web developers or hackers to, source into what's in there, and there might be some sensitive information or anything like that, then you would want to make sure that that code isn't loaded. So it's really a matter of what's more important to you for your business requirements. But again, I've done the can activate in a previous video, so I'm going to run the can load in this one. So with that said, I can go to my guards and I can open the guards. Now, for whatever reason, I chose the can load, but it's given me this can activate interface, so we're going to have to change that, but we'll come back to that. One more thing I want to do is I want to download a package, npm install JWT decode, because recall that in our backend core, when we go to log in, we get in return a token, and that's the JSON web token. Now you could put some data nested into the return call there, but I haven't done that, so I'm just going to use this JWT decode package. And more or less what they'll allow us to do is to be able to access our JSON web token data from this token that we're given. And we'll see exactly why we use that in a moment. But one thing I might do just before I get into the real body of the work is I might just go into the environments into here, and I might just say I want to have a base API URL, because I'm going to be doing multiple HTTP requests now. I want to make it so that this is refactored to a higher level. So our API is on 3000. Now this should be a comma. Now obviously in production you're going to have a different endpoint here, well, base URL for your endpoint, but I'm just going to go ahead and chuck it into production. So I'm going to need the key end value there, and we won't even be using this, but just so I don't forget about it, I'll just put it there. But yeah, please note that you want to change that to your production value, of course. Now that we've got the environment variable set up, what I might need to do is I've used it in one area, so I might need to do a very light refactor. And I believe in the home, in the post service, this, rather than this being localhost here /API, we can actually go ahead and put this whole thing in backticks, and we can use the ES6 template literal syntax, and we can actually go ahead and access our environment variable, so that gets auto imported for us. and we can just say the base API URL. Now we're still wanting to go to the feed endpoint, and we can do that like so. And then we can go ahead and we can add another template literal for the params. And the params is the end, so they'll just get chucked on by default, so we don't need to have a slash there. And with that, we can go ahead and delete that. And that should do it for the post service and the environment. So we'll close those up. Now we can begin to work on our actual logic. So we're going to be using the user, and recall that we're going to expect some data back like this. So we're not going to get the password back, but we're going to get the ID, first name, last name, email, and the role. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to there's going to be a user object, which is this user part, and that's going to be used throughout our application. So I'm going to have a model for that, but then I'm also going to have a response model for the payload, which also includes when the token was issued, and that's second since Unix epoch time, and also the expiration date with a same time type. So what I'll do is in this auth folder, I'm going to create a new file in a models folder called user.model.ts. So what I'll do here is I'll export an interface user, and that's going to have an ID of string, a first name of string, a last name of string, an email of string, and it's also going to have a role of the type role, not router link but role, and it's complaining because we don't have a type for that. So I'm just going to make a custom type here, and I'm making it a type here that I can export because I'm going to use this in more than one place throughout our application. So I'll just chuck it here. Of course, you could make a new file for it if you want, but there's this relationship between it. So I'm just going to put it here. So we've got an admin, a premium, and a standard user. They're the different role types that one could be. So recall there's the user response as well. Now again, you can structure this however you want. I'm just going to put it here. You could put in the same file, doesn't really matter. Or you might have another way you like to structure your models. You might even have a higher level model where you have your back end models and your front end models separately, and then different sections like that. But I'm just going to do it like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and export an interface, and rather than having these variables here, I'm going to call this user response. Now user, well, we've already defined a user, so we can just go ahead and get that in. But there's also the expiration, which is a number, and an IAT, which is when it was initialized, and that's a number. And the final model we have is, it'll be the new user model. So we'll call this new user.model.ts. Now I'm just going to go ahead and copy this interface for user again, and I have the interfaces defined now, so I can more or less close these down. And just for this one here, I'm going to have a new user. So this time the role won't be there yet, and the ID won't be there yet, but we'll have the first name, last name, email, and we'll also have a password here. So this is the data that's going to be coming from the form, and we'll be able to pass that through. Now, of course, you could do some sort of, you could have use the user object and have some optional parameters and all that sort of stuff, but I'm just going to keep this simple. The web application's not too large at the moment, and so this will be the approach I'll take. So since I have that set up, I can actually begin to work on the actual logic. Now, the approach that will be taken is that we want to guard the feed route, so the home page, in the occasion that they're not logged in, so they didn't get a token. So we're going to have to check that, but before we do that, we're going to have to make the functionality to be able to log in. So if you recall from when we were creating the UI side of things, we got to the point where, and I might just run an Ionic serve so we can visualize what we're talking about here. So recall when, if we were to be signed out, well, we haven't actually implemented a logic here, so I'll just, it's just, all we have here is so I'll get rid of this token from before, but we just have this sign out method here called, and that's just coming from the auth page, and we have, handle login, handle join, and actually that's coming from the popover component. So, but what I wanted to highlight here is we've implemented the boilerplate here for where the logic will be handled, and now in this video we're going to actually implement the logic. So for login, join, sign out. So let's go ahead and just start with the auth service here. Now we do want to add the guard to the route, but the main logic should be in the auth service, and then we're going to connect to the service in the guard, and we'll see that in action. So basically the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the register method. So let's see here, I'll say register, and this is where we can have a new user of the type new user, and in response we're expecting an observable, and we're expecting a user back. Recall when we registered a user, we'll get that response of the whole user back, and we set that up in the previous video. Now we will have to import observable from RxJS and also the new user model. So what we'll do is we'll also inject the HTTP service. So we'll say private HTTP of the type HTTP client, and we'll also get the router while we're here, because when you sign in we're going to want to reroute them to another page, or if they're not logged in we want to send them to the auth page. So we can go ahead and get that. So control period from Angular router. This is just erroring because we're not returning anything, so let's go ahead and return something. But just before I do that, I want to have some HTTP options, because by default the GET request will be in the JSON format, but when we're doing post we want to specify that in the headers. So we just create this object here with the headers key, and that's going to be of the type HTTP headers. And what this will be is it will just be that object with the headers key, And we can just go ahead and use the new keyword here, so new HTTP headers. And this takes in some options here, some configuration, so what sort of headers we want basically. So I'm just going to say we want the content type, and we want this to be what's known as application/JSON, which is just JSON, of course. Now once again, you could refactor this HTTP options higher, but the body of my work is going to be through the auth section where most of the requests are. If I do find I build out even further, I'll refactor it at that point, but I don't want to refactor too early in anticipation. It's a very easy thing to do anyway. Lots of times software developers over-engineer and they're not actually getting anything done, so I'm just going to take the approach of refactor it as needed. So, okay, so now we've defined our options here, we're able to actually make our HTTP request. So we want the user back. So what we'll say is we'll go ahead, and because this is in the service, we're expecting to have this service injected into our page, but we've delegated the logic to this service, of course. So with that HTTP service that we've injected, we can call a post method. Now you can type what we expect back, which is user. Now you don't actually have to have this observable user here, but I like to put it there just for when I look back at my code, everything's really clear. Although the HTTP brings back an observable of this type. So with that said, I'm going to create the path. So we had the environment variable, so we can just say for the environment, we can get the dot base API URL. So that's what we defined just before. Just localhost 3000 API, and so we can tack onto that. We want to hit the auth endpoint and the auth register endpoint here. Now we've got the first name, last name, email, and password coming in through this new user object. So we can just go ahead and just say we can just pass to the server the new user object, and as a third argument we can have our HTTP options. Now I'm going to have to bring in this user from our model. So this will get back our user if we subscribe to this observable. And I don't want to have any open subscriptions or anything like that. So what I can do is I can actually, on an observable, have this pipe call. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to use the pipeable operators. And that allows me to intercept that observable and do something. And then when I subscribe to it, it will have that sort of filtered effect, if you will. Or the extra effect. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. It's not coming up in the IntelliSense, so in RxJS I'm just going to copy this down, and I'm just going to say take here, and it's /operators where it's coming from, so that gets rid of that error. So if I open up the auth page, and where I have this method here, where I'm registering, so this is login, this is join. So if the submission type's equal to join, it will also get the first name and last name in addition to the email and password. And if the first name and last name is not set for whatever reason, it gets through our front-end validation somehow, well then we'll just return out and not do anything, but this is where we will actually handle the method. So rather than this console log here, since we have our Auth service now, which has the name Auth Service, we can just go ahead and in our constructor, we can just say we want to inject that with a private Auth Service of the type Auth Service. Control period to bring that in from our services. So that means we have access to that method that we just created. So in this part of the code here, we're able to say, okay, what we'll do is we'll just say we'll return this .auth service .register. Now I'm not going to pass all the arguments in directly, so I'll just create a variable for that. So I'll say the constant variable called new user of the type new user is just going to be equal to, it's going to have a first name, so we can just use the syntax like that. Last name, email, and password all follow akin. Now we're going to have to bring this new user model in, but this is just equivalent, if you're not already familiar with it, to first name, because I've defined the variables the same as the ones that are coming in. So the new user object interface variables are, you know, first name, last name, email, password, and these variables are also first name, last name, email, and password. I can use this shortcut syntax. So that means when I'm calling my register method, I can just go ahead and pass in new user. Now that will do nothing by itself. However, I can subscribe to this and I can pass back. So what I'll do here is I'll just say I want to call this toggle text, because record toggle text, it changed the form from the register form to the login form, and it will also preserve our login details. So the email and password will be already in the field, so we'll just have to click sign in and they'll let us go in. So you need to subscribe to this register method, and recall that I've used this take one, so I don't need to do an ng on destroy or anything like this. This is equivalent, so there's no memory leakage there. So it's not, we're not necessarily wanting to do anything with that data from the new user. So we don't need to pass in an argument here, but we do just want to just toggle the text. Okay, so that should actually allow us to register, and let's just check that that works. So, and I haven't set up the guards just yet, but if I just navigate to the auth/login page. Okay, so there's an error there. It's not auth/login. I believe it's just auth. Okay, and if you're worried about error handling on the front end or back end, I'm going to come back to that and do a video on that. But I thought I would start off by tackling some more exciting parts. So if I go to the auth page and I go to join now, and let's say I have Harry and I have Harry Doe and I have harry@hotmail.com, and I enter the password of password here and I click accept and join. This actually preserves the password and email address into our sign in functionality. But more importantly, if we go to our database and we search for the new rows, we'll see that we have this Harry Doe entry. So the endpoint was successful and we successfully registered a user, and then we've got in that hash password there as well. So what we want to do now is we want to create the login functionality. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we return to our Auth Service, we can have a login function. Now this login function, it's going to take an email, which is a string, and a password, which is a string. And what we're expecting back here is an observable. Now, the type of this observable that we're expecting back, I'll just put return here, is actually going to be, it's coming from our endpoint. And if you recall our endpoint auth/login, it actually returns just a token with the JSON web token. So we can just define this object here, which has one field token. And of course, that's just going to be one big long string. So we can actually go ahead and we can use this HTTP method again. And we might just go ahead and just copy this, because it's going to be similar. Although rather than getting a user back, we're getting just a token and of the type string back. We will be hitting our auth endpoint, but we will be hitting the auth/login endpoint here. Rather than passing in new user, we're going to pass in email of email and a password of password, or if you like, email and password shorthand. So I've deliberately chosen the variable names here to be of that of the type, just to have this nicer syntax here. That's just personal preference. So we are expecting just the token and string back, the token which is a string back, if we put in the right email and password, and again we'll handle error handling later. And once again, we don't want to do any unsubscriptions or anything like that, so we use this take one here. But what I want to do is I actually want to tap into the response, so I can use this tap operator. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to do things with what this is returning. So this is returning a token of the string type. So let's just go ahead and put that in. So the response we expect there is just going to be a token, or an object with a token and a string. Now with that result, we want to do something, so we add a code block here, and we can just go ahead and we can bring in tap as a operator. So you use tap when you want to typically do something else, rather than modify the the response, because otherwise we'll just return that. Or if we wanted to map into it and return like a data type, we could do that, or we could use a switch map to return another observable, and we'll see all those. But this is just a tap. This is just simply tapping into this response here, and then we can look at it, and with that we can actually do something. Now what we're going to do here is, typically in a web application you would store your token in local storage, but we're also dealing with mobile devices, iOS and Android devices. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use capacitor. So capacitor is just a wrapper, and it allows for the cross-platform functionality. And what we're going to use from capacitor is this thing called plugins.storage. Now I believe that auto imported it, and we can see that that's actually, the plugins are coming from capacitor core. So that, so as I said, that allows for storage in local storage, but also on your native mobile device platform for both operating systems. So that's great, that abstraction's there for us. So we can just go ahead and just set the values. So we want to go ahead and set something to our storage, our local storage. So what we can do here is we can pass in the object that we want to set. So this takes a key and a value, and this is in line with if you go to Application tab in Google Chrome, for example, you see that you have a key and a value. So those words are predefined, and I suppose their equivalents in the mobile devices are also key and value, or capacitor takes care of that for us. It's not really of our concern because everything works out nicely. But yes, we do need the key, and we're going to call it token, and the value we're going to put into a local storage with the key of token is just going to be our response, and our response has a object with the token, which is just the string. So we can just go ahead and put that in there like that. Now we've got our token, but how do we get our data from the token or from the response? There's two ways to do it. One, you could set it up on the back end that we're giving back data in that response, but I've decided to take the approach, and I've done that in a previous video series in the Angular node login system. If you want to view that approach, it's quite easy. But I thought I'd take a slightly different approach where I'll actually use something different. So I'm using this JWT decode. We installed that before. So I'm going to just go ahead and use that to decode the token. So I'm going to have a constant variable called decoded token. And this is of the type user response, which we defined before. And this is going to be equal to the JWT underscore decode. And then we just go ahead and we pass in this response token here. So what we're decoding is basically, it's essentially just like what happens in JWT.io. You pass in the token, that's what's going to be stored as a string in our token key. And then we have all this data here, and that package just decodes that for us so we can extract that information there. So I'm going to do a control period and just get this from, actually, this is a special, it's a sort of different type of import. If you look at the documentation, what it requires you to do is, rather than the object destructuring way, you can go ahead and import JWT underscore decode from JWT decode and save that. So now we don't have any errors on that method there. We pass in a response token. So what we've done is we've made the login call, which returns the token, and we've set it in local storage or in our mobile device storage. And now we've decoded the token. So now we have access to this in here. But how do we know, or how does Angular know that that user is now present? So essentially what we need to do is we can actually log in and log out as different users and all of that. So it's not satisfactory to have just one single variable for the user. It actually, well, there's can be one variable, but it can't be like a regular type of variable. It has to be, we have to use RxJS to use a behavior subject, because we want to update that manually. And if you're familiar with subjects, it's just an observable, except you can manually call it. So when some event happens, like you log in, you can call this observable and it'll trigger an event which will update a variable. So if you log in as a particular user, an asynchronous operation will occur. You'll hit the endpoint and it can, in response to that, use the data and update it. So we'll just go ahead and work on that, and for that we're going to need to, up at the top of our class, right at the top, we want to make a private variable called user. And this is going to be, as promised, a behavior subject. And the difference between behavior subject and subject is behavior subject, you can actually call the next method before subscribing to it. So if you call a next method before subscribing to a subject, it won't take that value, but behavior subject will. And what I want back is the actual user. So just to start things off, we'll set this to null. So we're going to have two get methods here. And we're going to detect, because in our guard we need to detect if the user is logged in, and elsewhere in our application we want to detect the user role type, and that's where we change the color of the banner in the profile summary component. You can use, I'll just go ahead and write the methods, but you can actually use either one. If you want to do role-based authentication, you can just simply return the user role, and if it's equal to, say, admin or something like that, you can have a separate guard for that and put that on. It's quite straightforward. But I'll write the method and then talk about that, because it might make a little bit more sense after I've written it. So if I say get user, if we want to determine if the user's logged in, we can just say get is user logged in. And actually, even just before I do that, I forgot to finish one thing off right here. So we've got our decoded token. So what I want to do is, now that I've defined that behavior subject, is I want to actually say this user, I can call next, and I can call next on that decoded token, which is of the type user response, and I actually just want the user from that. So basically you log in, and provided everything, all the credentials are alright, the API returns back your token. We decode the token, it's also sent to storage, and then we set that user. Now I'm going to make a get method to see if the user is logged in or not, and it's going to be based on that that observable subject that changes and can be changed actively, as we've done here, we're calling this next method before being subscribed to even. So basically this is just going to be a so basically the reason we want this, if the user is logged in, is because we want to have a guard, so we can put this guard on our routes in our router module. And basically, if it's true, that means it can activate or can load. In our case, we'll change this, and then it will get through. But if it returns false, then the user isn't have valid token and credentials and all that, so it will not allow you to get through. So basically, we're going to get an observable back of the type Boolean. Now, because you can log in and log out and log into different accounts and all that sort of stuff, so you need to be constantly looking out for that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say this.users, and we're going to return this because we want to return a true or false value. But this is a behavior subject, but we want to make it an observable, so we're able to pass back an observable of the Boolean type. And there's actually a method for behavior subjects and other observable like functions called as observable. And what that allows us to do is it makes this an observable, or this user observable, which allows us to call the pipe method. Hence we can use the switch map operator, because what we want to do is we want to return an observable of the Boolean type. But here we're returning an observable, but this is of the behavior subject. So we need to use this switch map to convert one observable type into this other observable type. So we know that when we're subscribing to this user, we're expecting a user back from that, or null. And so we can just go ahead and then say for that user, and I think I'll have to bring in switch map here. For that user that we're expecting back, or null, basically what we can have here is we can say, we can create a variable. So is user authenticated? And this variable is just going to be equal to an expression here. So if user is not equal to null, if user is not equal to null, this will be true. That means there is a user. So this will be true. Otherwise, what we'll do here is we'll say we'll return, and we need to make this an observable, because is user authenticated is just, you know, true or false, but we're returning an observable of a Boolean type. So we use this of method, which converts things like you know, the primitive types into an observable, and that can be used in our guard. While I'm here though, I'm going to say I'm going to have another get method, and I'm going to say I want to get the user role. So I'm just going to say this returns an observable, but rather than returning an observable of the Boolean type, I'm going to return an observable of a role type, and there's a reason for that, and that's because our auth guard is expecting a observable of the Boolean type back, or a variant of a Boolean. However, we're not returning a Boolean here, and we're not actually going to authenticate against, we're not going to authenticate our modules against the role. In our case, like you can see, if you go, okay, so we get an error for now because things aren't fully written properly, but you can see under the grey overlay that it takes you to this page here. Well, you don't have to be an admin user to see this page, so it doesn't make any sense to guard the route on a page. But I just wanted to highlight that you could make this a get Boolean, and you could have a second guard here saying is admin or something like that, and based on if the user is going to be an admin, or you know, maybe even premium or something like that, you can guard the route in the router page just like that way. But I'm going to use my role authentication actually by injecting the Auth Service into the pages where I'm using them, and then based on that I'm going to slightly change the UI a bit, because you might want to do that, like on some of the pages, you know, you might not be working on a LinkedIn clone, for example, but you know, you might have a website where there's admin only UI elements which basically give extra data about someone's profile, for instance. So you went to a LinkedIn profile, there might be some extra admin features that say how many times you log in and all these sorts of things. Or they could be in a whole other admin section, and if they were in a whole other admin section, it would be in that case where where you would have an admin module and then use this getter where it's getting the user role, and based on that, if that's an admin, I would create a guard, and then if it returns true, then I would block that section. But I'm going to do it just for authentication, but it's a very small step to go beyond what I've written here to protecting the routes based on your authorization access. And you should be able to, if you've been following along with this video series, it's more or less just making some very minor adjustments. So with that, all that said, let's go ahead and see this. So I can just say I want to return, and I might actually just copy this here. So once again, I changed the subject into an observable, so I can use the pipeable operators to convert from that particular observable and switch it to the observable that's going to give back a role. So you're still going to get a user back from there, but rather than this stuff here, I can just go ahead and I can just say return user.role. And I believe I'll need to bring this in from the models. And basically, if you're logged in as admin, this will come back with admin. If you're logged in as a premium member, it will come back as premium. And just to emphasize one more time, if you wanted to have role-based authorization, you can just go ahead and you could say return false. If admin, return false. And then you'd have another guard is admin. And if you wanted another one, you could have a guard for is premium. And then they'll just check if is premium, return true, otherwise return false. If it's false, it won't let you get through the guard. And then where the guard's applied on the route, it won't let you go there because it's protected. So very straightforward. But I've got the login method, I've got the register method, I got the getters for the role and if you're logged in or not, and we got the subscription, or we got the subject for the particular user. So we can begin to work on our auth guard now. Now, I don't know why, but for some reason it did not bring in can load when I selected it. But we can just go ahead and make some adjustments here. Now I've looked at the can load method and it does take a route as an argument, but it takes it of a different type. And the type it takes it of is, actually we don't actually need the route or the state in these examples anyway, so we can just go ahead and delete those. We are expecting an observable of the Boolean type back. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to need that constructor. So above this can load method, and if you're not sure what's going on here, basically in the app routing module, what we want to do is on this home page here, in the on the route we want to protect, so where it's loading the children, we don't want to load the module if it doesn't pass our auth guard. So we have this can load here, and we can just go ahead and pass in our auth guard here. Obviously we haven't created our auth guard, but this will make it so that it will protect it when it's working correctly. And since we've got this getter to get if they're logged in or not, we can use that in our auth guard. So we can get a constructor here, and we can go ahead and we can inject that Auth Service, which is going to be of the type Auth Service. So we'll bring that in too. So that means in our auth guard, now we're returning an observable here, so we can go ahead and we can return that auth service method, which is the user logged in. Now recall that this is this is returning an observable And like before, we don't want to have any memory leaks or anything like that. And it's returning it, true or false. So basically what we want to do here is we want to pipe into that observable, and we just want to say we'll just take one. We only need to take one, and then they'll automatically destroy the subscription. And we can also use a switch map here if we want, and we can just say is the user logged in? So that's what we're going to get back. We're going to get back a variable true or false if they're logged in or not. That's going to be a boolean. What I'll do here is I'll say if the user is logged in, so that is true, we'll go ahead and we'll return is user, and that should be logged in. Is the user, return that. Now I've used a switch map here. You might just think, oh well, you don't need a switch map, you can just return the true or false response. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this here because I'm going to make it so that if they already have a token in storage, this will actually call another method, and that will return true or false as well. So that would mean that rather than them not being able to access the home page if they've logged in but refresh the page, for example, you'll get the token from storage and let them log in. But to do that, we need to use a different type of observable. It's still returning true or false, but we do need to map another observable on there. So I can just, we need to change the function that we're calling. So let's just go ahead and get switch map in, but we'll come back to that. What we'll do now is we'll tap in to that, and in either case it's going to return a true or false value. So we'll just say whatever that boolean value is, we can do something. So if they're not logged in, basically what we'll do something like this, and I might need to bring tap in as well. But if they're not logged in, I do want to actually route them to the auth page. So I'm going to run I'm going to need the router of the type router. Bring that in. It's coming from Angular router. So if they get to this stage, we can just say, okay, we can use that router and we can navigate by URL, and from our base URL we just want to navigate to the auth page basically. So we will just go ahead and get rid of these, but we're going to need to have can load, but we can get rid of these other imports here. And getting that can load makes it so that when we interface, when our AuthGuard implements can load, we no longer get an error here. So this part here might seem a little long-winded, but I just want to demonstrate that this is indeed working. So what I'll do is I will go to my auth page, Now, if I go to my home page, we get an error here. And essentially, in our app routing module, we have this can load auth guard. So the auth guard's being applied. But let's just go ahead and try and go to auth and log in. So let's say I log in at john@hotmail.com and I type in the password. Now it's not going to reroute me, but if I go home, okay, I still get an error. So I'm getting an error here, so I need to solve this. So I'm just going to try and debug this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out switch map and tap. I might leave tap there actually, but I'm going to comment that out. And I'm just going to say, I'm just going to console log. I'll type 3 here. Is the user logged in? So let's see if that works. If not, we'll see if the error's further back. Okay, so it is guarding the page, but it's not really doing anything properly in terms of rerouting or anything like that. But we are getting this 3 false here. So let's try go to auth, log in, type in the password. Okay, I think because I'm not rerouting, it's reloading and it's not actually getting anything from the storage. So this is where I wanted to reroute. So I'm going to go through that again. I'm just going to go ahead and reroute. So, alright, let's just do it again. John@hotmail.com, password. Okay, so it's not rerouting me. Oh. Yes, I see. It's rerouting me to auth. But I only wanted that if I wasn't logged in. Okay, and I've realized I haven't actually been calling this login method, so I'll need to go to the auth page, and where I have this onSubmit method, basically I need to subscribe to the observable. As I said earlier, if you don't subscribe, nothing's going to happen. So rather than this bit here, I'm going to have a return, and we already have the Auth Service injected from before, so I can simply just go ahead and call this login method and type in the email and password and go ahead and subscribe to that. Now I'm not doing anything in response to the response, but I am wanting to route to the, so I'm going to need the router here. So I'm going to copy this here into the constructor and bring that in. So that means I am able to call this router and navigate by URL, and then when I log in, I want it to redirect me to the home page. So I save that, and now this login method is subscribed to. That means things are firing, and that means the user's set. And then when we get the user, things should start to work because you know, we have access to that now. So let's go ahead and comment these back in. So if the user's not logged in, it's going to navigate them to the auth page. So let's go ahead and save this. So let's try and go to the home page. Okay, we're still getting an error here. But if we go to the auth page and we go to sign in, and I'm going to go to the application. If I type in john@hotmail.com, type in the password. Now we see that in our application we get this token here, but it hasn't rerouted us. And that's probably because I've got this hangover from before. So it should be saying it is logged in, but we'll make it pass this if check, but this was here as well when we're debugging. So it should theoretically work now. So we go to 8100, we still get that error, but if we go to auth, go to application, we type in john@hotmail.com, type in the password, sign in. Okay, now we've successfully gone to our home page. I want to have a sign out page here and also fix the error from before. So let's go ahead and let's do the sign out first because that's going to be easier. So in our auth page, in our Auth Service, we want to have a logout method. This isn't going to return anything, but basically I want to check if basically I want to extend this guard out a little more to check if the token's in the storage and then log in if it is. So before we do that though, I'll just quickly do this logout method, because all we need to do is just clear the user. So we can just say that's set to null, and since there's no user, they'll no longer get through the guard, but they may already be on the page. So in addition to that, I want to go into the plugins, into the storage method, and there's actually a remove method here, and we can just pass in an object with the key and the particular key that we want to delete. So we want to delete the token key from storage, so that will delete this here. So we also want to just go ahead and just use the router to navigate by URL back to the auth page. So this is going to be used on the pop over component, recall in the header. So in our home module, in our components, in header, in popover, in the TypeScript file, when we're calling sign out, we're just logging something. So what we'll do here is we'll just say, well, we want to call this Auth Service, so let's go ahead and bring that in by injecting it into the component. Oops, wrong one. You can bring that in there like that, import the Auth Service, separate our service from the Angular core, and now we can go ahead and we can call this Auth Service, and we can call this logout method. So let's get that going. So let's go to our auth page. Let's sign in. Reroutes us here. We get this token. We sign out, and it deletes our token and takes us back to this auth page. So what I want to do is I want to work on the token functionality, and I also want to fix the error on the page, and I think I'm going to do that by working on getting the token and checking it. So in this, I can close this now, but in the auth service, below this login method here, I'm going to have another method, and this is going to be called isToken in storage, and this is going to return an observable of the Boolean type. Now we can once again use the capacitor plugins, and we can use the storage plugin, so we can get from storage based on our key, and our key is called token. Now what this is going to be is it's actually going to be a promise, because it's going to take some time for the operation to happen, for it to go into the storage, get it, and return it to us. So we want that string back, the JSON Web Token back, but we want it in RxJS format. So we're going to convert this promise into an observable. So we can just go ahead and wrap the whole thing in a from, and we're going to need to bring that, and we're going to need to return this, but this is going to return the observable now of the storage plugin, but we want to return a Boolean, so we're just getting a key and a token back, or a token back in our data. And so essentially we want to map that data into some sort of observable format, into some sort of Boolean format. So we can pipe into it, and we can use the map operator, and we'll need to bring that in from RxJS operators. So we will be getting data back, and the type of data we're getting back is going to be the value of the key, and that's just going to be a string, because it's always going to be a string basically. But we got a JSON Web Token value in a string. So we've got the key value pair, the key is a token, and the value is going to be the string. So the token correlates to the string value. So with that data that we're getting back from our capacitor core to the storage, our local storage system, we do want to just have a quick check here, because it could be the case that there is no token and there is no data even. So if there's no data there, or there's no token, and it's called value here, because it doesn't actually know what it's returning until we define that, we can just go ahead and return null, and that means it won't return true. It will return a nullish, something nullish. We don't want to return false necessarily, because it's not, null suffices. It stays in line with our other nulls throughout our application, in particular subjects and stuff. But if it makes it past that check there, we can actually decode the token, We can have a constant here, and this is going to be the same thing as here basically. But rather than it being called response token, it's going to be called data value, because it's just getting it from the local storage system. Capacitor doesn't necessarily know the data type of it. We know the data type of it, so we can go ahead and do our operations on it. Now recall that in our JSON Web Tokens, what we're getting back here, when it's issued or when it's expired, this is at seconds since Unix epoch time. So when we compare it to something like a new date, for instance, we want to compare it to the millisecond version. So what we need to do is first we need to define a variable, and I'm going to have a very descriptive name here, and this is so when you come back to the code you know exactly what's going on. And I am using uppercase M because I'm using camel case, but that is milliseconds. So it just looks a bit weird if you use a lowercase m. That's just personal preference. So I got this constant variable, JWT expiration in milliseconds since Unix epoch. And that's going to be coming from the decoded token. And there's going to be that EXP field. So once again, the expiry date from this decoded token that's being decoded for us from the JSON Web Token. So we just actually need to times that by 1,000 to get it from seconds into milliseconds. And then I'm going to have a expression here and a variable that represents that expression, i.e. is expired, because if the token's expired, they might have a valid token issued by the server, but if it's expired, we no longer, like things will be protected on the back end anyway, but we still want our front end to have a nice user experience, so we won't allow the authorization in that case. But essentially, if we make a new date object, this is going to be the milliseconds since that Unix epoch time, which I think it's in 1970. The milliseconds from there. So if the time right now is greater than the new date that's going to be made when we pass in the milliseconds from epoch time, that means the token's actually it's expired. So basically, if the token is expired, we once again would just want to return null because we want a falsy return statement such that it does not make it through the guard, or the returns a falsy boolean that when the guard calls it, it will not return something. However, if it makes it past there, and it really should have a decoded token, so this check might be a little unnecessary, but just to check again, and if it fails this check, it was just simply not run, so it won't make it won't make it through the thing because it won't return true. But essentially, we can just call our subject, and we can just call the next method on that for the decoded token user because it exists. That means we've gone from setting something null. So this is in the case where you've logged in, you have the token in local storage or your storage system, but you've closed off the page and you come back to it, or your app, and you come back to it and it's going to see, is the token in storage? If it is, decode the token, and return null. It should be return null if there's no data or if the token's expired. Otherwise, for the decoded token, we can actually go ahead and say set the user that way based on the token, and the token's issued by the server, so you can't just guess the token, or even if you were to backwards engineered the JSON Web Token and it had similar properties and all that sort of stuff, like it wouldn't actually matter because the server hasn't issued that token and it's such a long string that there's basically no chance of decoding it. But we would want to just go ahead and return true. So that means if we go back to our auth guard, our logic in here is saying, and this is why I've put this logic in here, this may look redundant because if the user's logged in, we can pretty much just skip to this tap here. And if they're not logged in, it'll just go to the auth guard. However, if they're not logged in, or our Angular application has the variable set such that is user logged in is false, well, if it's true, it's going to just return back what the is user logged in is. But if not, first we're going to try to see if there's something in the storage system. So return is token in storage. So if the token is in storage, basically this will return true because it's made it past all these steps here, and that means this whole can load method will return true. And if that whole can load method returns true, that means for the route that it's on, it will make it through. So we'll make it through the feed route. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in here. I get my password. It reroutes me to the home. Now, before, if I reloaded home, it would not. It would take me back to the auth menu. But if I reload it now, it does not. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sign out. And now I'm going to try and go to this route here and see now the error has indeed gone away, because there's no token, and we try and check the token. Well, the user's not signed in, so we go and try and check if a token's there to see if we can sign in. That's not there, so then we end up getting a false there, and then we navigate to the auth page, which is exactly what we want. So that's great. So I'll just add one little thing. So I no longer need the auth guard open, but in the Auth Service, I do want to just say when you log out that this actually, and actually we already removed it from our local storage and pushed the user next, so we don't even need that. So what I would like to do though is I would want to add some role-based stuff going on. And if I just log in one more time, basically, as I said previously, if you wanted to, in your auth guard, you could just return, you could have another auth guard where you return true. The auth guard could be is admin, and then you put it on the route. So auth is admin, and if the user role is admin, then that will return true. And you could have the same thing for premium and so on. Now you can't have multiple auth guards, but obviously in that case, because I think there's some sort of asynchronous issues there, but in that case you would have some, you would need, if you needed multiple, you could have a master auth guard which calls separate auth guards, and then that one single auth guard is referenced. But you wouldn't even have to do that in the case of role-based authorization. You could just, like, obviously you're not going to get this user role back unless you have a user, so just that in itself is equivalent to having a user logged in. And then if you want to go into more specifics, like is admin, for example, you know, you have a separate guard that says, well, if it's an admin, you know, obviously you have to be a user to get the user role. So that actually supersedes the if they're logged in, because obviously they're logged in and they have the authorization privileges. So basically, in short, you just have to have some sort of getter here that returns a Boolean value based on if they are is an admin, and then use that guard. Just exactly how we've done it. However, I've logged in because I just wanted to highlight this banner part here, because probably more common, you'd only want to do that if you have a whole module that you're trying to guard from particular logins, and they could be your application, but more typically you want to just change the data on a page, show a little more, have a little less, or you could even have a combination of both things. But for these purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and just do something basic. I'm just going to go ahead and change this color. So if you're an admin or a premium user, you're going to get a different color here. And this will require a little bit of a styling, but also it will show us how to use the role service, the authentication service that we've created in our components. So what we'll do is this section here, this is in the profile summary, and I should just, if you're haven't been following along, if I show you the database, I've got 3 users at the top here, John 2, John 3. I think this one might be new, but I had the user and the admin role before, and I've also just made a premium user here. So we're going to use this role to change the colors of our profile summary component. So that means we can open up our source folder, we can open up our home folder, we can open up our components, we can open up our profile summary component, and we'll open all of the pages here. We're pretty much done with our auth page and auth service. We just need to use them now. So let's actually open up the HTML, the SCSS, and the TypeScript here. And we'll start with the TypeScript. In our constructor, we'll go ahead and we'll inject our Auth Service, which is of type Auth Service. So I've done this a few times now. Separate the imports. So on the ng-on init method, which gets run when the component's instantiated, what we want to do is we actually want to call this auth service, and we want to get the user role. So we can just say user role, and it's not a method because we defined it in a getter. So recall that this is returning an observable of the role type. So what we want to do is we just want to use our take operator again. So we just take 1, so we don't have to unsubscribe to it, and they'll take care of the cleanup for us. But we can subscribe to that, and we know we're getting some sort of role here. So we're going to roll the type role. Okay, I think this needs to be in its own thing like that. So we'll bring that in from our models, and that's basically going to be admin, premium, or user. And with that, we can go ahead and we can set some colors here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a variable up here because I'm going to do some dependent styling here. So I'm just going to say dependent banner colors, and I might even make a type for this, and I'm just going to put it at the top here because this is the only place where it's going to use it. It's very specific. You could put it in its own file if you wanted to, but I'm not feeling the need. I feel like this component is going to be lean enough. But basically I want to have the 3 colors. So I'm going to have they're going to be strings, And I'm going to duplicate that line down 2 times. I'm going to change color 1 to color 2 and color 1 to color 3. And that just makes it so I have a nice type that I can return. So the banner colors are going to be of the type banner colors. And you may have wondered why I hard coded these values in here, and I didn't put them into our global stylings or anything like that, because I want to just go ahead and use these colors here. So I'm going to use this one here as my default color one. So I'll get that, and I'll also get this here, and this is going to be the this is going to be the, so this is just a regular user. Before, these are just these sort of default colors here. So I'll change this to color 2, this to color 3, and I can go ahead and delete that. That's the same color as the half ellipse, so I'll delete that. This DB E7 E9, that's going to be our second color here. So that's color 2. So we can delete that. We can also delete it from up here in the backdrop. And finally color 3, it's going to be this other lighter bluey grey sort of color. So I can save that. Can get that in there like this. Now that should just be a white background now, because we haven't done any, we haven't put it in the template or anything like that. But what I'll do here is I'll have a private function here, and this is just going to be called get banner colors. Now this is going to depend on the role, and then it's going to return our banner colors type. So that means when we subscribe to our Auth service to get our user role back, what we can do here is we can just say, well, we have this banner colors here. We can set that equal to what this function is going to return for us based on the role. So we can just have that. And this is just going to be a simple switch statement here. So I can type in switch, and I can type in this second one here, get the basic shell for it. So this is going to depend on the role. Now I'm going to save this, just get the indentation right, but the case is if they are an admin, what I want to do is I actually want to return, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here. Now I've already pre-selected these colors. Basically I've chosen like golds and purples for admin and premium. So I'm just going to go ahead and type these in here. You can make these whatever you want. So DAA 520, F0 E6, 8C, and FAF AD2. Now I'm going to copy this case down, because I'm going to have something similar for the premium member. However, I'm just going to have some slightly different colors. I'm going to have the BC8F8F, and I just copy this over. You can choose whatever you like. CO9999 and the DADAF. And if they're not an admin or premium member, they're logged in because they made it through the guard, but they're just a regular user. So I'm just going to go ahead and return this .banner colors. Now by itself this won't be doing anything. We've removed it from the SCSS file, and if we go into our profile summary component, we just need to add some, in our template here, we just need to add some styling. So we know that background 1, we know that the style here is going to, for its background, it's going to be equal to the banner colors color 1. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this down because it's also going to be color 1 for the half ellipse. It's going to be a color 2 for background 2, and the background color 2 is also going to be on the backdrop, and background color 3 is going to be background color 3. So now if I save that, based on the role, we're able to interact with that and get the template going and the colors going. So we can see that we get this auto login here. We can go ahead, we can sign out. Now if we log in as john2@hotmail.com and I type in the password, okay, so now John2 is an admin, so we should be expecting some sort of colors here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a console log. I'm just going to put the number 9 here to get the role, and then I'm just going to make sure I get the role when I call. Oh, that should be alright actually. But I'm just going to go ahead and check that I get the role. Okay, I think that was just a temporary caching thing. But now you can see I'm logged in as the admin and I get this nice gold color here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this role here, this console log. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a final sign out. I'm going to log into my other type of user. And then we're going to recap everything. So this is password. And I do believe there's some caching in the style sheet. Obviously you won't be doing this too frequently, but I just reloaded the page, and I think when things are compiled properly, you will indeed get this nice purple color going. So that was awesome. We've implemented authentication in Angular. Just to recap everything we've done here, basically we've set up the ability to log in, to sign up. So I'm just going to say test, test, test@test.com, and password, accept and join. It populates in here. Check out the database, look at the rows, last guy here, test@test.com, and the password hash. By default, type user. So if I return to my front end Ionic Angular application, the email and password has been pre-populated for us. If I click on the application tab and I click sign in, it generates the JSON web token for us. Now again, there is this slight caching issue, so I'm just going to refresh that. And you can see that I am now on this protected route here. I can go ahead and I can sign out. And now that I'm signed out, it deletes the key. I can go try and get to the home page, and it just reroutes me directly to the application login. And if I log in one more time, and I sign in here, now based on the role as an admin, I get this nice gold background here. And that pretty much completes the authentication and role-based authorization implementation on the front end, on the Ionic Angular side of things. So in the next video, what I want to do is I want to actually have the ability to perform CRUD operations on posts. I also want to, since we have authorization set up and authentication, I want to have some sort of guards to ensure that only the user that has created a particular post can perform the update and delete CRUD operations. So you don't want to just, if you're logged in as user, just go ahead and delete other users. I will make it so that all users' posts will appear on the feed, but I mainly want to work on the posts here and the authorization of those posts. Later I will also want to work on, say, some image upload, some error handling, and let me know if you want to see some, like a chat application, like some WebSockets and the Nest implementation of that. So coming, on LinkedIn, you click in the bottom, there's a chat and talking to each other in real time. There's a bit of work in setting that up. It's not too bad now that we've got our application set up, but if there's a bit of demand for that, I will go ahead and make that out in this project. If not, I'll perhaps do it in a later project in another type of perhaps clone. So just let me know what you guys want to watch. Do you want to watch more of these clone projects, more of theory, Angular, yeah, because I'm just trying to get my subscriber count up to 1,000. That'll be awesome. Then I'll be allowed to put monetization on the account. So I've put a lot of work into these free video series. As you can see, it goes beyond your average to-do app. So if you appreciate that, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and sort of interact with me and let me know what you want to see. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and continue these authorized CRUD operations. So I'll see you on that one. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers.